Now, here comes the lingo that would help you explain things. Boron is what we call an electron donor, meaning it's an element that loses an electron easily. That's a key term. If you're talking about this on the AP test, instead of saying boron, you could just say a metal like boron, or you could just say an electron donor. That's conceptually important to put in your notes. Boron is an electron donor, like a blood donor. Spelled the same way, D-O-N-O-R. Next, the semi-permeable electrolyte membrane. Just to remind you, you can make these be selective any way you want. They're charge selective, so they can go negative up, negative down, positive left, positive right. They can go negative both directions. They can go neutral only both directions. Next, you use silicon because it's a good conductor. Meaning those electrons always go somewhere, always go somewhere, always go somewhere. They're very, very good at moving electricity. Silicon lines up perfectly. Those atoms are always touching another atom. Next, that idea with the solar panel where the sunlight breaks off the electrons and those all shift to the bottom, there's a really helpful term that's called building polarity. You know, because you make it polar. You make the top positive and the bottom negative. Building polarity. So remember, sunlight hits the boron, electrons shake loose and migrate to the bottom. Building polarity. And now you connect them with a wire and the panel does work. Yeah?
So when you're saying silicon is a really good conductor, when you were talking about how like when things go along, when the energy goes along wires, it gets lost in the transfer, is there just very little loss in the transfer on silicon?
Yeah, a perfect silicon grid is a theoretically zero resistance conductor.
But that doesn't quite exist.
Yeah, I think that's not in practical terms.
Right.
But anyway, it's hyper efficient at translating energy. There's almost no loss. So we've got our panel, the donor, the conductor, the polarity. Remember, the whole problem with off-grid systems is that batteries suck. Also, Bonnie's cell phone. I'm not asking what you're doing with your cell phone. Did I say what are you doing with your cell phone?
No, but now you're like asking me and you're putting me on the spot. It's making me uncomfortable. I'm just looking at a picture of what's on the board.
Use Instagram.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
On-grid or grid-connected systems. Kind of painted myself in a corner with that one. Photographed the whiteboard. Fine. Not fine. Grid-connected systems are great because of this one secret ingredient that's not found everywhere. The two-way meter. A meter that goes forward and backward. Remember, those are not available everywhere. It's kind of the fly in the ointment for those systems. You can build it, you can figure it out, you can do the math, and then you just can't get the electricity to go two ways.
It's like, so if you don't have like a battery in the house with an on-grid too, it's like all the energy is just flowing out in and out of the house all the time.
Right, 100% of productivity is being used somewhere. You just make it at a higher voltage than what's on the grid, so it just goes out to the grid. Remember that we did these out of order. So skipping hydrogen fuel cell. Oh wait, sorry, done with photovoltaic. Remember that the whole concept of solar thermal is to focus or concentrate sunlight. You're putting it all in one place. So either the parabolic mirror will put it all in a pipe, or a field of mirrors will put it all in a tower. You're concentrating or you're focusing the sunlight. That's good lingo to use. That's easy to say. Remember the key parts of this system: the heat exchanger, the steam is pressurized, the turbine, the generator. Remember the big deal with the new style, the field with a tower, is that you can store heat after the sun goes down. That's nice. You make it hot enough that it can survive the nighttime and still boil water. In some cases, 3, 4, 5 days and still boil water. Now, skipping from solar. When we talk about hydroelectric, remember that the good parts are you can store the water and make electricity on demand. Make a ton of electricity. Think of Hoover Dam. I showed you those humongous turbines. I think I told you yesterday that nowadays Americans love their rivers. We demand living rivers, meaning they have to have their fish stuff, and they have to have their ecology, and they have to have the birds, and they have to have the plants. And it turns out that dams really kill rivers. We'll talk more about this in the next unit. A key word that you may want to look for in the future is silt. Silt is little sediment carried by water. And when we get to the water unit, we're going to talk about how dams are stupid because they block the silt from traveling and instead they fill the reservoir with silt. So this is just a preview of vocab that you'll need later down the road. When we talked about tidal systems, I think it's important that you use the right lingo to explain what's moving the water. So watch me. I'll give you the lingo for what moves the water. Here it's tides, like high tide, low tide, going in and out of a bay. This is tides. And some people who spend a lot of time in the ocean, all these words are obvious and you understand them. And you know what's funny? Like members of the general public, like a lot of times they don't have the right lingo for what's happening with water. They're like, I don't know, isn't that current? And like, no, that's not. So you got to get the right words. This is tide, like high tide, low tide, going in and out of a bay. Remember, the extreme latitudes, fragile ecosystems, high cost, we didn't do that. Number 2 is powered by current, which is just large bodies of water drifting. Currents are made by wind, so they'll usually go in the same direction. And I got to remind you, these are barely operational. Like, it's really not a good way to make a ton of electricity with current. Tidal reefs are powered by waves, like surface surge, like surface action hitting the sand or hitting a sandbar. So that's called either surge or wave energy. In ocean thermal, you're not using the movement of water, you're using the heat of water. There's just a few places that are hot enough. If you look on this map, it's hard to find a place with surface water that's hot enough. But if you can get some hot surface water, and you can get this magic ingredient, a coolant that boils below that point. If it boils at 85, you can use surface water that's 86 or 87. You put in a coolant when it's cold, it turns to steam and then comes out under pressure. Yeah.
Just more of an environmental impact question.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be near the shore, or is that like in the middle of the ocean?
You can find hot surface water pretty far from shore, but you still gotta get the electricity back to the humans. So usually we're talking like a couple of miles, 3 or 4. Anything more than that, it stops being a good distance to push extension cords.
Well, I mean like more in would it affect like aesthetic of beauty or whatever, and like
It could. I'm not really clear on how big these rigs are. Nobody likes to see them. Like when you're looking 4 miles out, you can kind of see almost anything on the water. So if you push it further, you can make it less of an eyesore. But usually all these things that are on the water, you don't want to go too far because it's tough to move the electricity. Finally, in an oscillating water column, remember that this whole thing is just a way to translate surface action into air movement. So you're making fake wind. Think about it. The ocean's always going like this. And this thing, that sound I was making, I want you to have that image. Like all of these, if I had 1,000 across the ocean, all the ones where the water's rising inside it would be pushing out a lot of air. And all the ones of these where the water's going downhill, that'd be sucking in a whole lot of air. It takes tons of plumbing to manage all that airflow. But you're basically using a bazillion columns of water to draw a lot of air, and then you're using a bazillion columns of water to push a bunch of air. And that air is always moving, so you get this constant turbine. As long as the water has texture, remember that surface action, you're making like an artificial wind turbine. Speaking of wind turbines, I gotta remind you that the problem with wind is all those friggin' birds. They really do kill birds. Like,
I thought the bats were the problem.
yeah, and the birds is something that we may be able to solve, but that's a tricky one. The bats is another one where economically, like, birds are an ecological consideration. Bats are ecological, plus they literally impact our national bottom line economy problem. That was a full review of everything we discussed previously in seminar. It's been what, 25 minutes since class started? 20 minutes? I can give you all the time you need to answer questions on any of these technologies, but when I move on, we're done with them. Ask me whatever you want now. If you're going to ask me now. Yeah?
So theoretically, if we had a good way to store energy, wouldn't like the problem of like the tidal ones where it has to be at extreme latitudes, if we could store the energy, wouldn't that eliminate that problem?
Not really, because there's zero tide at the equator.
Yeah, but if we could make those like up in like the Arctic where there is extreme tides.
You mean store energy and then move it?
Yes.
Yeah, that would solve that problem. Yeah, but I gotta remind you that you have two separate problems. Storage is usually site specific. So like I can store it by pumping water into a dam and then let the dam, but I can't move that reservoir. So a lot of energy storage alternatives are not mobile.
Well, I'm just thinking of
A giant tank just full of straight electricity.
Yeah,
that's,
but if you could, yeah, no, you're fine. I mean, it's I didn't mean to say that that's two problems.
no, yeah.
Yeah. Who else? If you want to ask me, I can help you. Yes.
I don't usually 30.
That's right, and I was planning to do that today. It's on my list. Thanks for checking. Questions on the stuff that we reviewed yesterday? Yeah.
I guess for the don't get like the thing, like the drawing on the right. It's like the.
I got you, sure. What I was trying to suggest is that it's bankable. Like if you sit on a pier and you just watch the water move, a wave that hits the tip of the pier is going to keep rolling and hit every piling of the pier all the way to the sand. Right? It's like this, like you make a thing in a sheet and that thing keeps pushing all the way through, right?
Yeah.
And so if you have one of these at the tip of the pier, that will move some air. But now if you have one over here, that'll move some air. And if you had another one, so you can bank these. You can make a bazillion of them that move the air as the wave passes each of them. So it's bankable. Anybody else?
So that's less of like you can bank it as in like store it. It's more of you can put a lot of them close to each other.
Right. Like the real efficiency of this comes when you have a bazillion of them, not a single one. Anybody else? All right. I'd like to do number 30, number 34, and then a little wrap-up bit of notes on this assignment before the bell rings. Yeah?
Is there any like energy that doesn't involve spinning a turbine?
Only this. I'd like to leave number 30 for dead last. And number 34, I didn't even draw it, because I don't need to. Number 34, I don't think I need to draw it. On number 34, I'd like you to write turbine generation using steam. Turbine, generator, steam, that kind of stuff.
Wait, you mean 35?
34 is the like biomass stuff.
Oh crap, 35, my B dog. Everybody, I made a mistake. It's number 35 that I should have been giving you notes on. I apologize.
Turbine generation using steam.
Turbine generation, steam. But we don't have to make the water into steam. There's something that's always hot. We can give this thing cold water, it'll make steam for us. Underneath the Earth's crust, there is a layer of red, hot,
Magma.
Aliens.
So look, if you can just find that hot rock, you just pour the cold water down there, and it goes to steam. Like you've all seen those geysers in Yellowstone, I assume? Maybe on television? Where like they just like spit steam sometimes, and there's like bison around. Tourists that fall into them sometimes.
And they have that weird
Get shot
bacteria that's fluorescent.
They do! Extremophile bacteria. Technically, there are energy storage compound ecologies that are not based on carbon, just discovered in those geyser communities. Like deep ocean vents that are based on chemical reactions that are not carbon. Anyway, if you could just find a bunch of magma near the surface, cold water in, steam out, bingo! There's some tricks about like keeping the steam pressurized and finding the magma, but there's magma underneath all the crust. Yeah, bro.
Can you pump like other kinds of can you pump like salt water into it? Do you have to pump fresh water or drinking water?
There's something about the boiling point of salt water which is a problem.
even if it was in magma?
Yeah, I kind of feel like saltwater might. You could probably do anything you want with magma. Yeah, maybe that would work. I wonder. I'm not an expert because nobody does this because magma is really far down there, unfortunately. The Earth's crust is really thick pretty much everywhere. Like, I guess you could put a power plant in a volcano, but what could possibly go wrong? Making a hole on the edge of a volcano?
Just make sure it doesn't blow up.
Right. I kind of feel like the volcano things are out. So maybe there's places with a thin crust near a volcano? Maybe that would work. But not really. Geothermal is a good way to cool stuff because the dirt is kind of cool, so geothermal cooling is more common. George Bush's ranch in Waco, Texas has geothermal air conditioning. But there's one country that has unlimited geothermal resources. Unlimited.
Iceland.
Russia.
Indonesia.
Iceland.
How did you know this?
Because it should be.
So many hot springs.
Attaboy. Ginger comes through. Knew you had it in you, little buddy.
Is it because it should be icy that it's burning?
No, that was just a cool naming trick by a realtor back in the day. You've heard that story?
Vikings?
Yes.
Realtor?
Yes, Viking realtors. He's real. Everybody go to Greenland.
Where they own shrooms.
Yeah, don't go to Iceland. Iceland's all icy.
Guys.
We got a Greenland.
P.S. Iceland is like heaven on earth. It's the most beautiful place. Isn't Bjork Icelandic?
I think so.
Do you guys know why Bjork has such an amazing voice?
She's Icelandic.
Because she's a fae.
Because when she was a little girl, her family ignored her and she lived in these like fjords. So she would just spend all day like wandering grasslands and yelling at the waves and trying to create echoes. Iceland. Look! At the bottom of the ocean is where you get new tectonic plates. They're thinner because they're new, so they get weighed down by the water, so that's why they're down there. Isn't that rad?
Whack.
They're the new thin fragile crusts. So all the new stuff is weighed down by the water, and all the old ones only make land when they smash into each other and stack up and get all crusty and compacted and old and dirty. So we live on the B-rate tectonic plates. The really freshy fresh is down underneath the water. And check this out. Anybody ever had a scab like on their kneecap or on their elbow, and then when you move, your scab cracks open, and you get like a little ridge on the side, and then some wet juice in the middle, and that'll make a really thin, fragile scab, but then you move again and it cracks again? That's Iceland.
You just call blood wet juice?
Yes.
Cool.
So look, that's why you have these mountain ranges at the bottom of the ocean, and they're all at the bottom of the ocean except look at this mountain range. Get ready. Watch it right there. Boop, that's Iceland. And there goes the mountain range continuing. Iceland is the only place on our planet where a major divergent boundary occurs on land. So Iceland has this really thin, brittle, fresh, new crust. By the way, that also means they have a ton of copper, which is what you use to make extension cords.
Is their whole country's a conductor?
I wonder what you could do if you had unlimited green electricity, unlimited copper, electric mining equipment, and you were pretty freaking close to Europe.
Start a war.
Iceland is about to become the Saudi Arabia of green electricity. They're almost done building the world's largest wire. I'm not kidding. This is real. It's like extremely large diameter and extremely long.
Where is it going?
Someone just.
It's going to Ireland first, because Ireland had this growing tech sector a while ago. You may remember that Apple moved there at the turn of the millennium.
We
Why
were
would we
all in
remember that?
diapers.
And so when Ireland realized they wanted to grow the technology, they're like, we should house a bunch of like computer firms. So the wire is almost complete. And pretty soon, like Iceland is already off the grid, so to speak. They don't have any fossil fuels. Iceland as a nation is carbon neutral. And here's the crazy thought. They can start selling electricity so the entire European Union can go carbon neutral. So they're going to get so rich. And the crazy thing about magma is you don't run out. So Saudi Arabia is going to run out of oil. So is Venezuela, just like Texas did. But not Iceland. They're so winning. They are so winning. Plus they have like excellent education and like free universal health care. And they have Bjork and Babes. Hella nightclubs.
And the Northern Lights.
12-year-olds on ecstasy. The Northern Lights.
Maybe their northern lights aren't real, it's just all the 12-year-olds on ecstasy.
I was just thinking that.
Big.
Yeah.
But like to get the magma though, is it like hard? Like
You don't get no magma. You just have hot rocks. You ever heard of like a hot spring? Hot springs.
yeah.
You know how like hot springs is where you like go like, whoa, this water's hot. Like that water got heated by the rocks. So it's just like instead of finding a hot spring, you just drill a hole until you make a hot spring. And if you drill a little further, now instead of a hot spring, it's a steam generator. Like a geyser. This is so cool. I'm so happy for Iceland. They're so winning. Meanwhile, in the US, we're like, I burned rocks. Anybody want to talk more geothermal? Done with geothermal? All right. Momo Baloney really wanted number 30, so here we go.
There's a lot of energy lost with that wire with Ireland.
But who cares?
They have unlimited energy.
Don't worry. Can somebody look, Google this? Is Bjork actually Icelandic? Oh, your phone's always out. Why don't you look it up?
Alright, what was it?
Oh God! Please break your phone. Is Bjork Icelandic?
Yeah. She's from Reykjavik.
Regular.
Reykjavik.
Reykjavik.
Yeah, not it.
Reiki.
Reskovich?
I don't know something.
Hit it, Jellic. It's called
Reykjavik.
Reykjavik.
Place.
How long were you in Iceland?
2 weeks.
Was it beautiful?
Repeating her
No way.
I didn't think.
Like,
I didn't
it's just so like barren and like there's some waterfalls and like
Is it the
lakes and stuff.
monster?
He's
Like,
That was all you got.
But it's cold as turkey, right?
I mean,
You were there in summer.
I was there in summer, so the days were super long too. Like the sun never set. It was like,
Imagine the flip side.
yeah, I know.
Everybody murders each other.
And night, yeah, but like nightclubs all night, from like 6 p.m. till 6 a.m.
This video is inspired.
Alright.
You just put Croatia for Iceland.
That's pretty far.
Morgan just asked.
One is Mediterranean. One is Arctic.
Morgan
Alright.
just asked if York was a place, so.
Oh my God, where are we going as a people? burn rocks. Yorkist country, do we burn that? Alright. 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 The hydrogen fuel cell thing is kind of a lot to take in. That's the reason I leave it for last, is honestly, I know a lot of you are just going to be like, and then it's going to be over. I leave it for last because I really, conceptually it's a lot, and then chemistry-wise it's a lot, and then technically it's a lot. So a lot of students just kind of get like shell-shocked and then give up. There's a bunch of little details that we should probably get straight. First of all, the hydrogen atom doesn't have neutrons. That's actually important and it's relevant. I swear I'm building up to something. You probably want to put this down. Hydrogen is just a proton and an electron. If you take away the electron, all that's left is a proton. You may want to try this. Please look up. Hydrogen minus its electron becomes a positively charged hydrogen ion, which is just a proton. Right? Because it's just a proton and an electron. That's hydrogen. It's one proton, one electron. That's just what the element is. I'm sorry, this is just a reality of the universe. That's the most common thing in the universe. So you've probably got to roll with this. It's the most common thing in the universe, but it's never loose. Hydrogen's always stuck to stuff. So you have to do this thing called hydrolysis. Which is peeling off the hydrogens from water. That's energy intensive. That takes lots of energy.
Nah.
Did you say peeling hydrogen off of water?
I know. Yeah, like they're going to remember this. Yeah, peeling hydrogen off of water. It's called hydrolysis.
Go ahead and beat your asshole.
Don't let the white man keep you down, so.
Come on, who's the most depressed joke in the world? Gingers?
Because it's just a proton and an electron. Hydrogen, if you take away the electron, it's just a proton. And it takes a lot of energy to get hydrogen because it always sticks to stuff. It takes a lot of energy to split that water. So what's interesting is, as a conceptual thing, before I talk about this, remember that hydrogen fuel cells run on hydrogen and it takes energy to make hydrogen. So these are not sources of electricity. If you have extra electricity, you can make hydrogen and use it later. But this is basically just storage. Please look up. Electricity to make the hydrogen through hydrolysis. So these are better considered as storage. This whole system doesn't give you electricity. It's something you can do with electricity to make electricity later. Anybody want to ask me anything so far? Okay? The parts of the hydrogen fuel cell are catalyst, conductor, plus right, semi-permeable electrolyte membrane, plus right. You can make them go any way you want with any charge you want. This is a plus right. And another conductor. Catalyst, conductor, plus right, conductor.
What does it say at the underneath catalyst?
I'll get to that.
Cool.
Those 4 separate parts are a catalyst, a conductor, a plus right, and another conductor. Just like this, with a conductor, a negative down, and a conductor. This is a conductor, a positive right, and a conductor. Yeah.
What's the difference between like positive right and left and down? Like,
Just engineering. I could say girls in, girls out, boys in, boys out, tall in, tall out,
no, but like what?
redheads out.
What I mean is like, couldn't you just like turn that around and then it would be going positive left?
Yeah, so this is right relative to the diagram.
Okay. Yeah.
So
So
the better
it's
way
like-
to say this would be positive away from the catalyst side.
Yeah. Okay.
Like when you say that's like positive going somewhere, like what is going there versus if it's like a negative going somewhere?
Okay, got you. Different things have a charge or not. Like protons are always positive. Like water always has positive on one side and negative on the other. Charges, electrons are always negative. This is what electrons are. So what this does is it says anything with a positive charge can go in this direction. But if it has a negative charge, it cannot. It's like a bouncer at a club. Miners in. Now the catalyst, these are always rare metals. They're very expensive. You should know that they are rare and expensive. Like platinum is very common for this. And you all know that platinum's expensive, right? You all know that when Lil Wayne had to go to prison, the US taxpayer spent like, I can't remember, $25,000 to have a cosmetic surgeon remove his platinum grill because he said it was cruel and unusual punishment that the other prisoners would steal his fancy teeth. So he had like fresh white caps while he was incarcerated for brandishing a gun in his own show. And then when he got out of prison, the American taxpayers had to pay to give him back his trademark grill because he said it was cruel and unusual punishment to go back with regular white teeth because it would affect his brand.
He calls himself the best rapper.
I love our country.
Everybody says that.
I mean,
No,
not
no,
a
but he
lot
like
of
says
times
it.
smart.
It's like he gets,
I mean,
he's a legend.
he's a one.
He sucks at skateboarding. Are we good with this?
He's pretty good.
So far? Catalyst, we got this? So now, watch. Once you have your hydrogen, you throw your hydrogens at the catalyst, and the catalyst will split it. The electrons go here, and the protons go there. But their charge is positive, so they make it through to the other side. And we've built the polarity. Remember, the secret is, how do you make this into a battery? So over here, you understood, we shook off the electrons from boron with sunlight. Right? Makes that a battery? Here, when you feed it with hydrogen, the protons go to the right and the electrons stay on the left, and now it's a battery. Now, in a solar panel, the electrons just keep going. As long as the sun is out, that keeps happening. But not in a hydrogen fuel cell. This consumes hydrogen. It's not constant. Here, when the electrons get back over to the hydrogen, as long as there's air, the electrons, the hydrogens, and the oxygen play together to make water. So this consumes hydrogen to make electricity,
And water.
and it spits out water.
But you don't have to put water in it. You just
Correct. There's just air, so the oxygen from the air becomes that water. How many of you feel a little bit shell-shocked, like what the hell just happened? I wanna try to help you out with something, but I wanna make sure that everybody's done taking notes. I'm happy to wait. Yeah.
What is the PEM?
A semi-permeable electrolyte membrane, like this one. Semi-permeable electrolyte membrane, which is anything which is picky about which charges go through. Now, I know that this is a lot to know, but from your point of view, you never have to explain why the chemistry. And of the chemistry you need in Apes, I don't think you're going to need this reaction. I think that hydrogen fuel cells conceptually would be good enough for the AP test. So conceptually, takes electricity to make the hydrogen, and then the hydrogen fuel cell splits hydrogen to build polarity, and the electricity mixing with air makes the water.
And you can use the energy from this to make the hydrogen in the first place, or to separate hydrogen in the first place.
Well, you're never going to get more energy out than you put in. So you take this much electricity to make this much hydrogen, because there's inefficiencies in everything, and that much hydrogen will make this much electricity later. So this is not a source of energy. You should have just used the electricity in the first place. But if it's left over, it goes into the ground and gets wasted. Unless it's like, well, I guess we've got extra solar power today. Why don't we make some hydrogen so that tonight we have a little bit of electricity left over? It's just like a battery, kind of, where storage isn't perfect, but at least you get to put it somewhere. Yeah, questions? Yeah?
So, since you only have to explain it like conceptually on the AP
Yeah.
test, if like the question was like what's an example of that, and how do you mean conceptually? Just like a hydrogen fuel cell would work for this, or
I would think so. Like you could say hydrogen fuel cell is a way to store extra electricity.
without?
You could say that on a grid, if you have more electricity that's being used, you could make some hydrogen to return that to electricity later at night or someplace further away where you can ship electricity because you can ship hydrogen. Yeah.
So the actual cell, that diagram isn't really the storage, it's making the hydrogen.
That cell is using the hydrogen
Yeah, so the hydrogen is,
in like a bottle somewhere. It's
yeah,
a gas.
so that's the storage kind of, and
Right,
this is
so
how
what
to
you-
use.
Right. So
Okay.
what you store is the hydrogen. Yeah. Who else? Okay, draw a big line across the bottom of your notes from block. Everything. After this, draw a big line.
We don't have any more room.
Then start another paper. And please look up. The interesting question is, with all these alternatives, why are we still building coal-burning power plants? Why do we still have natural gas? Why do we still have petroleum?
It's easier.
What's it going to take to decide to move on from fossil fuels? I've got some notes that might help you explain. Probably the most important thing is that we need to be in charge of when we make electricity. If you are a power utility, you have to make electricity before David turns on a spotlight in the theater. The grid always has to have more electricity than people are using. You know what's crazy? If David turns on a spotlight in the theater and the grid doesn't have enough electricity, everybody else's stuff stops getting electricity to, the voltage drop, shuts off the grid. That's called a blackout. It's one person who pushed it beyond the supply and everything switches off. And you can't control the sun, and you can't control the wind. You can't even control the waves. There's only a few places with geothermal. There's only a few places with ocean thermal. Turns out that dams suck. So the crazy thought is, all of these alternatives, they're just not that smart for somebody who's running the grid. I mean, think about it. If you want to build a power plant that's all solar, go ahead, put up your solar power plant, but we still need this coal when the sun's not shining. And you can build all the wind turbines you want, but when the wind isn't blowing, we're still going to need coal. And if we already have the coal-burning power plant, why would we want a second one for just wind or just solar? You see, alternatives are just like redundant capacity. Number two, a lot of those renewables use up a ton of space. Like a wind farm, all the biomass stuff, hydroelectric uses a lot of space. But nuclear is tiny. We could have a nuclear power plant on campus and you wouldn't even know it.
Except for the radiation and
Until it melts down.
The natural gas, you don't need to store the natural gas, it's just a hose. So look at how little some of those power plants are. And check out my final list. There's always risk in new technology. Alternatives are less dependable. If it's really far, you're going to lose electricity in transmission. Anywhere you want to put a power plant, the neighbors are going to be pissed. That's called not in my backyard. Neighborhood opposition, NIMBY.